This is looking at the exemplar vehicle that we utilize for the latter part of our testing. You're looking at the, again, just annotating where the liftgate taillight is, as well as the quarter panel taillight.
When you say exemplar vehicle, what is this SUV that we're looking at?
So it's the same year, make, and model of the subject vehicle. So it's a 2021 Lexus LX 570. So it's the same weight, same geometry, same as the subject vehicle. Is
this a picture off the internet, or do you actually have access to this truck?
We have access to that vehicle, yes.
And ultimately, what testing did you undertake specifically as it relates to this particular vehicle?
We did full-scale vehicle testing with the vehicle driving into an ATD arm, as well as an ATD arm attached to a dummy, and then a full-on impact to a test dummy.
Did you assess the damage to the right taillight after these various tests?
Yes, after all of the tests.
Did you assess the acceleration and quantify the forces that were involved?
Yes.
Did you assess the material and textile damage to the clothed ATD?
Yes.
Ultimately, did you conduct lab tests in an effort to answer some of these questions as well?
Yes.
And you've already mentioned this, but you utilized in your testing the exemplar vehicle to the fullest extent that you felt necessary?
Absolutely,
Were
yes.
you hampered or hindered in any way in terms of damaging the vehicle or utilizing the vehicle in any way that you wished?
No.
Let's go to the next slide, please. What are tests A and B? What are those laboratory tests?
So these were the initial two tests that we did to get an idea of starting to test this hypothesis. As I mentioned, we weren't sure at 10 miles an hour what would happen to the taillight. We wanted to see what would happen at 17 miles an hour with the arm. So again, it was to evaluate from a starting point what happens in this interaction based upon how Dr. Welcher had his arm oriented in his PowerPoint and analysis.
Next slide, please. What is this?
So you're looking at a photograph of our lab setup. You can see on the left side of that is our Hybrid 3 anthropomorphic test device. To the right is a linear impactor, and this is something we already have in-house that we built years ago for our testing that we do for the National Hockey League when we're looking at, what's the accelerations on an impact to a goalie wearing a helmet, right? We use this same device for that type of testing to measure head acceleration. So we applied this same linear impactor to be able to project, if you will, or accelerate the taillight at a known speed into the ATD arm.
What are some of the instrumentation that you use in addition to the mechanical impactor? What's some of the instrumentation you use to track the data?
Certainly. So you could see, I'll get my, see around here. So at the top here, there's a blue camera here. There's another blue camera here. So these are our high-speed cameras. And you'll see there's a bunch of lights around those high speeds. That's just because the frame rate's so high. And again, it's only sampling a very, very short amount of time. So you have to have a lot of light when you do these high-speed tests. So we have the high-speed cameras running. We have an accelerometer mounted to the ATD arm here on the other side. So that's some of the instrumentation. There's also a couple other cameras that we're documenting this overall.
Can we move to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in these photographs?
So this is looking at, and not to be confused, this wasn't the arm position when the impact occurred. This is just showing you the setup. So on the left is just kind of an overall shot, and then on the right is, right here, is a uniaxial accelerometer. So that's going to measure, we talked about that term earlier, right, the acceleration. So that's going to measure how quickly is this arm changing its speed, right? What's the acceleration of the arm as it's impacted?
Does that accelerometer put into motion some of the mathematical formulations that you talked about earlier?
Yes.
Let's move to the next slide, please. Tell me about these photographs.
So the importance of this is, more specifically looking at the right photograph here, might be a little bit hard to see, but we wanted to get the same exact sweatshirt or hoodie for the testing to evaluate if the taillight breaks, is there a mechanism for the fragments to penetrate and cause holes in the sweatshirt as were observed in Mr. John O'Keefe's sweatshirt?
Next slide. Were you successful in finding the exact replica sweatshirt?
Yes, and I will note, as I mentioned, I know it probably is hard to see, but the material blend on the sleeves are the exact same. They are 60% cotton and 40% polyester.
Was it important in your mind to maintain consistency with the data that you had received concerning John O'Keefe's clothing?
Certainly. I think we wanted to try to control as many variables as we could.
Let's move to the next slide, please. Test A. Describe Test A for us, please.
So you're going to see a series of photographs and then videos, but Test A was mounting a preconditioned taillight on that linear impactor to accelerate it into the Hybrid 3 arm to, again, evaluate the damage to the taillight and the acceleration to the arm.
Let's move to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in these photographs?
So you're looking on the left, a photograph just before the impact test was conducted. On the right, you're looking at a thermal image that is depicting the temperature profile of the taillight.
Describe that thermal image.
Certainly. Your Honor, may I refer to my notes? So what I did is I analyzed the profile of the temperature down in this area. And when we look at that segment, that lower portion here, where contact was made, the average temperature in that area was about 34 degrees with a minimum of about 33 degrees.
How did you get that exemplar taillight down to around freezing?
So all of the taillights that we tested were preconditioned overnight in a freezer.
Why was that important?
Well, it's my understanding that at the time that this allegedly occurred, the ambient temperature was 31 degrees Fahrenheit. So as I mentioned earlier, certainly there's a correlation between how plastics perform in cold weather. So we wanted to take that variable into account in our testing to precondition them down to temperatures that were consistent with at the time of the alleged incident.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide, on this photograph?
So this is a video. Do you want me to go ahead and play the video?
Tell us what we're about to see, and then I'll ask the court's permission.
So you were looking at a camera that is mounted above the entire setup. If you look at the top portion of this video, you will see the taillight. Part of it's covered by the high-speed camera. But what will happen is the linear impactor will fire, and the taillight will be accelerated up to 10 miles per hour, striking the clothed ATD arm.
With the court's permission?
Okay.
Let's go ahead and play the video. Next slide, please. What is this?
So this is also a video, but with the high-speed camera. So it's the high-speed camera that's looking top down at the arm. So you will see when the video plays, you will see the taillight enter from the left and contact the arm. And I will note that this is essentially slow mode, so it's not happening in real time. So you'll see the taillight slowly moving, but it's actually in reality moving at 10 miles per hour.
Understood. Go ahead and play that. Can I ask a question now that that's played? How did you mount the taillight to the accelerator, that linear accelerator?
Right. So we had to get a little bit creative there because you may have observed this when we had the physical assembly out earlier. The back of that, it's not some nice clean surface that we can just bolt on. So what we had to do is 3D print a bracket that we could bolt onto the linear impactor, and we used a polyurethane expanding foam to be able to marry those two together so that we could then bolt it onto the linear impactor to use it for this test.
Did you see any debris from that foam mounting mechanism?
Yes, there's a few flakes you can see of that polyurethane foam off the backside kind of going into being dispersed there.
Okay. With regard to this particular 10-mile-an-hour test, what did you note in terms of the damage to the taillight?
It was very minimal.
And what did you note in terms of any damage at all to the hoodie?
There was none.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in this slide?
So this is looking at a side view. So same test, just looking at it from the side. And similarly, you'll see the taillight come from the left and impact the arm.
If we could play this, please. What did you note in terms of deflection of the arm, the test arm?
Well, the arm essentially, and we'll see this in the data later, it reaches a common velocity with the taillight. Based upon the portion of the arm that was contacted, again, consistent with how Dr. Welcher has it oriented, it will become accelerated up to 10 miles an hour roughly.
Over approximately what period of time is that arm accelerated up to 10 miles an hour along with the taillight?
We'll see it on the data plots. I think it's about 10 milliseconds or so.
How long, do you know how long an eye blink on average takes?
Off the top of my head, no, I don't. Probably pretty quick.
Somewhere around 250 milliseconds? Does that sound right?
Sustained.
Let's move to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this series of photographs?
So these are extracted frames from the high-speed video that we just saw on the previous slide, basically showing just at contact, just after contact, and then post-contact, so you can see the kinematics of the arm and how the arm is moving.
Okay. Let's move to the next slide, please. What is this photograph?
So this is photographs taken of the taillight after the 10-mile-an-hour test. I will note that there was a couple small fragments of the clear portion of the assembly, the outer lens that was missing from that turn signal area towards the left here. There was a couple fragments missing, and then there was some small fracturing here in that area.
How would you describe the damage to the taillight at the 10-mile-an-hour test?
If I may go to the next slide, I think it might.
Sure.
So this was the totality of that damage at 10 miles per hour. So I would describe it as minimal and superficial.
Okay. Next slide, please. What is this?
So this is the photograph that I just shown you compared to that of the subject taillight so that you can have a side-by-side comparison of the test taillight compared to that of the subject.
Were you able to reach any opinions and conclusions about whether the damage to the subject taillight is consistent with striking an arm at 10 miles an hour?
It's inconsistent, in my opinion.
Next slide, please. This is still test A, is that correct?
Correct.
Were you able to reach any opinions or conclusions as to whether or not the damage to Mr. O'Keefe's clothing is consistent with being struck by the taillight at 10 miles per hour?
What I observed from the test is that there was no mechanism to create any of the holes that we observed on the subject sweatshirt.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
As well as the former opinion that you just gave us?
Yes.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this graph?
So this is a graph that shows the roughly, on the next graph you're going to see a 24 millisecond window. So what I want to show you on this graph is what does that look like over a full second so you can have an appreciation of just how quickly this is occurring. As you mentioned earlier, I think your comment about a blink of an eye, this is even shorter than that. We're looking at, as you'll see on the next graph, again, it spans over just a few milliseconds. So that yellow tick that you see in the middle there, what I've done is I've plotted that over a full second. So 1 second is equal to 1,000 milliseconds. So if we go 500 milliseconds to the right, 500 milliseconds to the left, this whole graph represents 1 second in time. This impact duration is occurring very quickly.
1 second, is that reflected from the beginning of the graph to the end of the graph? That's representative of 1 second, is that right?
Correct. So starting at this y-axis all the way to here is 1 second in time with our impact duration happening over just a few milliseconds.
And this was at 10 miles an hour?
Yes.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this graph?
So we're looking at the acceleration or the change in speed over time, that parameter that we discussed earlier. So what you can see is that as the arm is impacted, we had the accelerometer mounted on the inside portion of the forearm, if you will. You see that it starts to accelerate, right? Because it's changing its speed, and then it starts to level off after the impact has subsided, basically, and it's reached a common velocity.
What do we see in terms of the G-forces that the arm is subject to?
So the peak is occurring right around here at about, looks like just over 6 milliseconds. And the peak acceleration is just over 130 Gs.
And what does that mean? What is a G?
So a G is acceleration due to gravity. So if we're being held down by 1 G, so you could think of it as basically a multiplication factor, that it's 131 times the acceleration due to gravity.
And the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this is, again, that concept that we talked about earlier, delta V. This is the change in speed. So if we do some math to the previous data that we collected, it's a technique called integration, where we can actually add up all of that acceleration to determine what speed did the arm get up to. And when we do that calculation to this data, what we see is that initially at the impact, right, the arm's at rest, right, Newton's law, first law. And then we impart a force on it in terms of the tail light impacting it. It's going to cause the arm to accelerate and change its speed. So as I noted earlier, it's essentially going to reach a common velocity with the impact force based upon how Dr. Welcher has the arm oriented. And we can see that it's a tick over 10 miles per hour at just over 10 milliseconds. So that means that the arm in a 10 millisecond period is going from 0 up to about 10 miles per hour, which was the speed of the impact.
And 131 times the force of gravity is exerted on the arm at the same time?
Sustained us to that point.
Where does gravity play into this? What is the 131 Gs? Where's that force exerted?
So that is the acceleration that the arm experienced as a result of that impact. So that's how quickly it was changing in speed.
Understood. Let's go to the next slide.
So is this a good place to take
It is.
the morning recess? All right, folks, we'll take a recess. Dr.